There's a reason why the Great Muta isn't covered much here on YouTube, and the reason is quite simple. It's an intimidating subject. Keiji Mutoh's work has spanned across generations with multiple promotions, yet his storied career doesn't get highlighted nearly as much as it should. Many people were exposed to the Japanese style of professional wrestling thanks to the Great Muta. Mutoh's initial excursion to the Florida territory during 1986 had gained Muta a following within the region, and word quickly spread about the revolutionary White Ninja tearing it up in the CWF. By the time Muta returned to the United States in 1988 to do a little work with World Class and WCW, he had already gained a reputation as one of the world's most exciting wrestlers. Thanks to the working relationship between New Japan Pro Wrestling and WCW, the Great Muta was able to show off his skills to American audiences on multiple occasions, and this is what we'll cover in today's video. This is the Great Muta in WCW. As previously mentioned, covering any aspect of the Great Muta's career is a big task. Viewers of my channel would probably know that Japanese wrestling isn't my strongest subject, and I'm not going to talk about Muta's early days in New Japan because honestly, there are more qualified people out there who could do a much better job than what I could. That's why I reached out to a man who knows about these things. I reached out to a creator that I've watched for years here on YouTube, a creator I respect immensely for his educational content, and a creator who I know will do justice on our subject today. So please welcome Dave Knows Wrestling to the Wrestling Bios channel. Dave gracefully agreed to give you guys a little history lesson on the Great Muta before his initial WCW run, so Dave, take it away.
Hey, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on the show, especially since you're so awesome at covering wrestling history, which I'm all about. And speaking of which, the Great Muta's wrestling history is pretty great. I couldn't think of a word. Anyway, from the very beginning, it was clear that Keiji Mutoh was being set on the path to become an absolute legend. Born on December 23, 1962 in Fujiyoshida, Yamanashi, Japan, Mutoh began studying both amateur wrestling and judo. He would earn a black belt in the latter in only 3 years, and rather than going to college after high school, Mutoh sought higher education in a different way, enrolling in the Tohoku Judo School instead, and even competed in several national competitions. Not long after, Mutoh would finally enter the next stage of his destiny, courtesy of one Satoru Sayama, otherwise known as the original Tiger Mask, who would introduce Mutoh to the New Japan Dojo. Joining at the tender age of 21, Mutoh proved to be a natural when it came to pro wrestling, debuting only after a year of training. But natural ability is one thing, because it also takes a great teacher to make someone a star. And Mutoh definitely had that with his trainer Hiro Matsuda, who had also trained other greats such as Hulk Hogan, Scott Hall, and Ron Simmons, just to name a few. On top of all this, Mutoh was also part of an amazing class as well. He trained alongside Jushin Thunder Liger, Shinya Hashimoto, and not to mention the man who Mutoh would eventually have his first match against, Masahiro Chono, which was also Chono's first bout as well. That's right, both Masahiro Chono and Keiji Mutoh debuted against each other on October 5th, 36 years ago, and just in case you were wondering, Mutoh was victorious. From there, Mutoh advanced faster than any of his other classmates and was quickly brought out of the opening card. He found himself working with the likes of Tatsumi Fujinami and even Antonio Inoki himself. This led to him rounding out his training by making a learning excursion to America, wrestling in Florida as a character called the White Ninja, where he would become the NWA Florida Heavyweight Champion. And he would also win the NWA Southeastern United States Junior Heavyweight Championship too. He would then return to Japan, just in time to battle the UWF as they invaded NJPW. And it was also during this time that he would debut a new gimmick, Space Lone Wolf, a character that would go on to become the inspiration for Mutoh's sushi restaurant, Dining 610, 610 being the number worn on Space Lone Wolf's jacket. But somehow, even though it was the inspiration for a sushi restaurant, believe it or not, the gimmick really didn't last all that long. as the focus would stay on the war against UWF, which led to Muto picking up the IWGP Tag Team Championship with Shiro Koshinaka, and this would actually be Muto's first Japanese title. Then in January 1988, Muto would then make another learning excursion, but this time to Puerto Rico and the World Wrestling Council, known back then as Capital Sports Promotions, wrestling this time as the Super Black Ninja, and he would win their television championship as well as the Puerto Rico Heavyweight Championship too. Thus, after only 3 years following his debut, Keiji Mutoh would have won titles in 3 separate countries. But all this was only the beginning. However, for the rest of that story, I return you to your regularly scheduled program. Once again, thank you so much for having me.
A big thanks to Dave Knows Wrestling for agreeing to appear in this video. I really do appreciate the assistance. Before moving on, Dave covers a ton of different subjects within the pro wrestling world. If you want to learn your wrestling history, if you want honest opinions from an honest old school fan, and if you just want to support a good dude who works hard in this tough wrestling YouTube landscape, then check out Dave's channel and tell him Wrestling Bios sent you. Again, a big thanks to Dave for helping out. So, Muto's first exposure to American audiences was during his first excursion to the Florida territory in 1986, working as the White Ninja. Before his 1988 WCW run kicked off, Muto stopped off in Puerto Rico and he had a brief stint in World Class, now working as the Super Black Ninja. Fortunately, a few of these World Class matches are currently available on the WWE Network and you should take the time to check them out. Super Black Ninja is quite an aggressive version of Keiji Mutoh that would team up with Kendo Nagasaki, and while the gimmick wouldn't last long, it's still fun to look back at. In March of 1989 though, the Great Muta would make his first appearance in WCW, working a match on the NWA World Championship Wrestling show against Cougar Jay, a match that Muta won. Muta was presented as a heel. He was introduced at the top of the show by Hiro Matsuda and Gary Hart, and Muta would become a member of the Gary Hart International stable, also known as the J-Tax Corporation. Muta was introduced as the Great Muta, by the way. This would get altered as the weeks went on. Muta's debut in WCW would go a long way in exposing him to a wider American audience, and while Muta worked as a heel during his early WCW days, fans were still captivated by his in-ring abilities and his mysterious character. Gary Hart put Muta over as WCW's greatest ever import and the very best wrestler from Japan, the Pearl of the Orient. The Great Muta was exciting in the ring. His explosive offense, his incredible agility, and his enigmatic persona all meshed together to create a superstar that fans couldn't keep their eyes off. What's more, Muta was booked extremely strong. He destroyed his opposition on TV in the run-up to his very first big show, even beating 2 guys at the same time just for the fun of it. Gary Hart would later claim that the Great Muta was the son of the Great Kabuki, the first man to spray Asian mist in the faces of his opponents, but of course in reality they weren't related. Clash of the Champions 6 is probably best remembered for featuring the second Flair vs Steamboat match from their famous trilogy, but Clash 6 also featured the Great Muta in action against Steve Casey. This was Muta's longest WCW bout up until this point, and it's definitely worth your time. As a matter of fact, you should take the time to watch this entire Clash of the Champions show. While Muta vs Casey may be an extended squash match, it's still a great showcase of Muta's offensive arsenal. Steve Casey gets the honour of being the first victim of Muta's green mist in WCW very early in the match, and from here the Great Muta got to show off his skills in his first big WCW show on TBS. Muta won the match with a moonsault, and even though he was supposed to be the bad guy, you can hear fans cheering for Muta simply because of how entertaining he was. What stood out during this match is how Muta would put a unique twist on already established moves. He even had his own variation of a basic armbar that made the move look even more dangerous. And what you have to remember here is that this is in 1989 when a lot of the big name wrestlers played it safe in terms of their wrestling fundamentals. The Great Muta was showing us stuff that we had never seen before, and it was a breath of fresh air. Following the Clash of the Champions, Muta would continue to destroy his opponents on TV, including more 2-on-1 matches. A rematch with Steve Casey was a little competitive, but Muta's winning streak continued. The very first meeting of Muta and Sting took place on the 23rd of March 1989, a house show match for the TV title that Sting won via disqualification. As this was a house show and because of the DQ finish, WCW would continue to build the Great Muta as undefeated. Our next big show then is Wrestle War 89, the Music City Showdown, again better known for its Steamboat vs Flair match, but if you want to see the Great Muta destroy Doug Gilbert in around 3 minutes, then Wrestle War is the show for you. Muta was originally supposed to face the Junkyard Dog at this show, but Eddie Gilbert's little brother ended up replacing JYD. The commentators wondered how Muta spread green mist and red mist during the course of this matchup. The TV champion Sting and the Great Muta would begin having more and more house show matches, all of which would end in a DQ finish. On TV, Muta continued to steamroll through his opponents, but it was only a matter of time before Muta vs Sting would be presented on television. Muta would also work with Eddie Gilbert during the 1989 Great American Bash tour, but at the Great American Bash pay-per-view, the Great Muta vs Sting was booked for the television title. By this time, Muta had a big fan following, and while fans would cheer for Sting because, well, it's Sting, a lot of fans were also behind the Great Muta as both competitors went into the Great American Bash. Remember, Muta was booked as undefeated, so there was a real possibility that Sting would lose his TV title here. Muta had even defeated 3 guys at once on TV, just to give you an example of how strongly booked the Great Muta was during this time period. I just thought I'd mention too that Muta defeated Big Scott Hall on his road to the Great American Bash, quite an interesting bout that was a little more competitive than your standard Muta matches of this era, and Muta also defeated Eddie Gilbert in a coal miner's glove match twice towards the end of the Great American Bash tour. Sting vs Muta at the Great American Bash is a fun match, but the ending is so well documented now that it kinda takes away from the experience. You have to imagine seeing this live for the very first time or not knowing how the match would play out, but anyway, the two men have a very competitive match, easily Muta's greatest challenge to date. In the end, Sting hits a back suplex and he goes for the pin. Muta gets a shoulder up before the 3 count, but the referee still rules the match in Sting's favour. It's then argued that Sting's shoulders were momentarily on the mat too, so Muta thinks that he's won the match. In the middle of the confusion, Muta grabs the television title and he leaves the ring, and in the end the match was ruled as a draw due to a double pin. It was admittedly executed poorly. It didn't even look like Sting's shoulders were on the mat for that long, and Muta 100% kicked out before the 3 count. This wasn't the last we'd see of the Great Muta on this evening though. During the Ric Flair vs Terry Funk NWA title main event, Muta showed up to attack Flair. Keep in mind that Terry Funk was also represented by Gary Hart. This led to Sting coming out to help his old rival, and this also set up a future tag team match for Halloween Havoc 1989. Before getting to Halloween Havoc, Sting and Muta would need to sort out their problem with the TV title. The two men met on an episode of WCW Power Hour and they had a near 15-minute barn burner, a real treat for fans who tuned into the Superstation on the 1st of September 1989. Hunt this one down, I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube. In many ways, it's even better than the Great American Bash matchup. After both men beat the hell out of each other, the match ends in a disqualification when Gary Hart pushes Sting off the top rope. WCW were going to milk this one for all it's worth and keep the rivalry going. After another string of house show matches between the two competitors, the Great Muta defeated Sting in a no DQ match at Centre Stage to win the television title. At Clash of the Champions 8, Sting was able to get a little revenge when he teamed up with Ric Flair to defeat J-Tex Corporation members Dick Slater and the Great Muta. The very first Halloween Havoc pay-per-view took place on October 20th, 1989, and WCW would set the tone for this new line of pay-per-views by giving us the Thunderdome cage match. The large Thunderdome cage would encompass the entire ringside area, not unlike the Hell in a Cell. Apparently there would be some electrified wire around the top of the cage too, so yeah, pretty dangerous stuff here. We have Sting and Ric Flair versus the Great Muta and Terry Funk, a ring filled with legends. There are are no pinfalls and there's no submissions. The match can only end when Gary Hart or Ole Anderson throws in the towel for their respective team. Bruno Sammartino refereed the match too, so there's another legend in the ring. And what we have here is quite an underrated Halloween Havoc main event that you should also put on your list. I think these early Halloween Havoc shows have a kind of bad reputation due to how ridiculous the main events would become, but the cage is used well during this match. In the end, Ole Anderson hits Gary Hart, and this sends Gary's towel flying in the air. Bruno thinks that Gary threw in the towel, and therefore Sting and Flair win the match. The fans go crazy as Jim Ross calls the finish controversial, but the ending here gave good reason for the feud to continue. Next up, we have Starrcade Future Shock, an interesting pay-per-view event that was based around two tournaments, the Iron Man tournament and the Iron Team tournament. Quite different from previous Starrcade shows, as there were no titles defended here, plus there were only a handful of wrestlers who worked the show. In the Iron Man tournament, we had Sting, Lex Luger, Ric Flair and the Great Muta, and really, the whole tournament was all about setting the stage for Sting's future rivalry with current friend Ric Flair. It was a poor night for Muta. He didn't win a single match. Flair defeated Muta in under 2 minutes, which was a real shame considering those 2 minutes featured some of the best wrestling on the whole show. Sting and Muta had another good match, but it felt a little short too, and Muta got himself disqualified in his match with Luger after spraying the total package with the green mist. With no points on the board, WCW done a lot here to bring Muta's momentum to a screeching halt. Not long afterwards, Muta dropped the TV title to Arn Anderson on an episode of Power Hour, so you can probably tell that Muta was getting prepared to leave WCW and head back to Japan as the losses began piling up. Muta's final match of this run was, of course, another loss. Arn Anderson, Ole Anderson and Ric Flair defeated Muta, Buzz Sawyer and the Dragon Master inside a steel cage at Clash of the Champions 10, held in Corpus Christi on the 6th of February 1990. Muta's string of losses towards the end of this run did absolutely nothing to kill his popularity with American audiences though. The Great Muta was an incredible loss to WCW in early 1990, and he had given WCW fans some incredible matches during his stint. Thankfully, it wouldn't be long before we'd see the Great Muta once again on WCW television. Muta went back to New Japan where he would continue cementing his legacy. New Japan and WCW had a great working relationship at the time, and this meant the Great Muta could return as part of some talent exchanges. Muta was able to compete in the Pat O'Connor International Tag Team Tournament held at Starrcade 1990, teaming up with Mr. Saito to take on 3 separate tag teams. In the end, Muta and Saito, who represented Japan obviously, got into the finals, but they were defeated by Rick and Scott Steiner. It would have been good to see these two teams go at it in the first round when they weren't so tired, but it's still a good final match, and it was also great to see Muta back in WCW, if only for one night. The WCW fans didn't forget about Muta either. They were chanting his name during his first entrance. The following year, WCW and New Japan co-promoted Starrcade in the Tokyo Dome, also known as the WCW Japan Super Show, on the 21st of March 1990. The event featured WCW stars battling it out with New Japan's finest, and the Great Muta was able to have another match with the man called Sting at this very event. After around 10 minutes of action, the Great Muta spread the green mist when Sting went for the Stinger Splash, allowing Muta to hit a crossbody and to score the win. Muta then showed up at the Clash of Champions 15 show back in America to face Lex Luger for the United States Championship, but Muta came up short. To be honest, you could probably give this one a miss. The Luger vs Muta match was also a number 1 contendership match for Ric Flair's World Heavyweight title. Muta vs Luger was supposed to catapult the total package into the main event picture, but the Nature Boy was having none of it. Flair went to the WWF shortly after, and he took the title with him. The following year, WCW and New Japan co-promoted another special in the Tokyo Dome, known as the WCW Japan Super Show 2 to Western audiences. Once again, Sting and Muta were featured in a match, only this time they were on a team. Rick and Scott Steiner versus Sting and Muta headlined the show, attracting around 50,000 paying fans, and it's another good match. This one shows off the selling abilities of the Great Muta quite well. The Steiners toss Muta around the ring like a rag doll, and some of the counters in this match are jaw-dropping thanks to the strength of both Rick and Scott. The finish is a little off though. Sting gets a roll-up on Scott while Rick pins Muta. The ref counts to 3 and Sting and Muta get the win. This is some prime Steiner Brothers stuff here though. Even if you aren't into the Great Muta, check this one out just to see how good the Steiners once were. Don't let the ending put you off either. Admittedly, the timing could have been way better for the double pin, but it's still a very fun match. Okay, moving on to 1992, the Great Muta worked a few house shows for WCW in May, finishing off with a TV appearance, a 2 out of 3 falls match on WCW Saturday Night against Brad Armstrong. The match goes on for nearly half an hour and Muta gets the win after getting 2 straight falls. Fortunately, this one is still available on YouTube and it's on the WWE Network. A fundamentally sound match here between Muta and Armstrong. After a few more house show matches the following month, it was back to Japan for the Great Muta. In August the same year, Muta won the IWGP Heavyweight title for the first time. Muta was then able to make amends for Starrcade 89 when he competed in the 1992 Starrcade Lethal Lottery. Although Masahiro Chono defeated Muta on the same show in an NWA Heavyweight Championship match, Muta teamed up with Barry Windham earlier in the evening to defeat Brian Pillman and Too Cold Scorpio, earning Muta and Windham their spots in the Battlebowl Battle Royal. And the Great Muta went on to win the Battle Royal to end the show. Quite a turnaround from a few months ago. The following month at NJPW, Fantastic Story in the Tokyo Dome. What a great name for a wrestling show, by the way. Muta's IWGP Heavyweight title was on the line against Masahiro Chono's NWA Heavyweight title. Muta won the match and so he became the NWA Champion. Muta dropped the NWA title the following month to Barry Windham at WCW Super Brawl 3. Apparently Muta had the flu during this match and it shows. Going for nearly 25 minutes was maybe not the best idea either, but the men get through it, although admittedly it isn't a great match. Super Brawl 3 is also noteworthy for being the first WCW pay-per-view under the Eric Bischoff regime, although Bill Watts had already planned out most of the show. Here's an interesting one for you. The Great Muta made just one appearance in WCW during 1994, and it's quite a remarkable matchup. Spring Stampede and the Rosemount Horizon, the WCW United States Heavyweight title is on the line. Champion Steve Austin defending the gold against the Great Muta. 1994 Steve Austin is a well-polished wrestler, and we already have an understanding of how good the Great Muta was at the time, so on paper this one sounds pretty good. Unfortunately, there's just something about this bout that stops both men from clicking. The fans are very much behind Muta here and he gets a great pop during his entrance. The match is fine, but it doesn't really showcase what both men were all about. Very few high spots in this one. There's the top rope Frankensteiner from Muta, but apart from this, there's not much to write home about. In the end, Muta was disqualified for throwing Austin over the top rope. It doesn't get much weaker than that, folks. A shame too, and you probably now know why no one talks about the time Stone Cold faced the Pearl of the Orient. The following year, at Slamboree 95, Muta came back to square off with Paul Orndorff, and I know what you're thinking. Austin vs Muta sounds great on paper, while Orndorff vs Muta sounds like the exact opposite. And really, your assumptions would be correct here. Muta had just won the IWGP title once again a few weeks before Slamboree, and the title was on the line for this matchup, and what we end up getting is a slow-paced bout with rest holds that go on for way too long. As a matter of fact, the whole bout goes on too long at nearly 15 minutes. Apparently, Johnny B. Bad was originally scheduled to take on Muta here, but Bischoff was concerned that the fans wouldn't know who to cheer for, so a possibly good match was sacrificed sacrificed over concerns about fan reception. Muta ends up getting the win with the moonsault. Later in the year, the superstars of WCW travelled to Japan for more interpromotional matches. We got to see Sting and Muta team up once again to defeat Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. Muta even wore some Sting face paint for this match, and Muta also defeated Lord Steven Regal during this same tour. After the summer of 1996, the New World Order began dominating WCW television. The faction even spread out to New Japan Pro Wrestling, which in turn gave us a version of the New World Order known as NWO Japan. Now, I'm not going to get into details about NWO Japan here because really it would make this video about an hour long, and I'd like to cover the subject in a separate video. But a main storyline within the NWO Japan faction was the allegiance of the Great Muta. Muta would confuse fans by becoming a member of NWO Japan while portraying the Great Muta character, but fighting against the faction while using his own name. Muta would fully join the group in September of 1997, but anyway, let's refocus back on Muta's WCW matches. The Great Muta worked against Masahiro Chono on the May 26, 1997 episode of Nitro. Mike Tenay compared Muta's situation with the NWO to Sting's problems with the faction. Chono had been trying to recruit Muta into the group, and Japanese fans were confused in regards to where Muta stood with the New World Order. At the end of the match, Muta sprayed his own manager Sonny Ono with the red mist, and Muta joined NWO Japan. Keep in mind what I said earlier though, over in Japan his loyalties were still under question. The following week on WCW Nitro, the Great Muta tagged up with Chono as a fully fledged member of the NWO. Muta and Chono worked against the Steiners, and thanks to interference from Harlem Heat, Muta and Chono won the match. A rematch then was booked between Chono, Muta and the Steiners for the 1997 Bash at the Beach pay-per-view. This was the first time Western audiences saw the famous NWO face paint on Muta, but even awesome face paint couldn't help Muta on this evening. In the end, the Steiners won the match with a great looking double team DDT. Chono and Muta would then defeat the Public Enemy on Nitro before Muta took 2 consecutive losses to the Giant. Muta then went back to Japan where his story with the NWO would continue. Again, I'll cover all of this in a later video. And now we get into the more questionable stuff because, well, WCW got a little more questionable as the years went on. The Great Muta wouldn't show up again in WCW until the year 2000, and we all know what WCW was like in the year 2000. Muta had suffered a knee injury earlier in the year, and he decided to go back to WCW for a little while, where the action would be a little easier to deal with. Muta returned on the July 11th, 2000 episode of Thunder, teaming up with the Young Dragons to go up against 3 Count and Tank Abbott. Even after all this time, the fans hadn't forgotten about the Pearl of the Orient as a huge Muta chant broke out inside the arena. Things quickly went south though. Muta got involved in a stable known as the Dark Carnival that also featured Vampiro and the Kiss Demon and the Insane Clown Posse. Now, in saying that, tag team matches that featured just Vampiro and Muta were quite interesting, but anything the Kiss Demon touched instantly turned out rotten, so let's just overlook this slight misstep. At WCW New Blood Rising, Muta wrestled in 2 separate matches. He was defeated by Ernest the Cat Miller, but later in the evening, Muta and Vampiro were able to defeat Chronic to become the new WCW Tag Team Champions. Their championship reign didn't last long as Juventud Guerrera and Rey Mysterio defeated Muta and Vampiro the following night on Nitro. The Kiss Demon eventually turned on the Dark Carnival, and this led to Muta and Vampiro having matches against one of the worst characters in WCW history. All in all, I think that this run is best left forgotten, and yes, I know there are plenty of Vampiro fans out there, and the overall concept of the Dark Carnival does sound a little intriguing at least, but Muta's matches during this time period were so short, and WCW was just a complete mess. You almost feel bad for Muta here. Take Muta's third from last WCW match for example. It was a singles match against Sting. Now, they could have done a lot here, but instead the main event match doesn't even make it into the ring. ring. The Dark Carnival ends up attacking Sting at the entranceway after Muta and Sting brawl for a few minutes. It's a complete waste of TV time. Muta ended his WCW career with a loss to Sting and Vampiro in a triple threat match at Fall Brawl 2000. A little redemption here, as the match wasn't all that bad, but still, it was nothing compared to Muta's glory days in World Championship Wrestling. And that was the Great Muta in WCW. I really don't mean to end things on a sour note either, because Muta had a fantastic overall run in World Championship Wrestling, and what's more, he introduced a lot of fans to a unique style of professional wrestling. Muta really is the success story of the New Japan and WCW working agreement. WCW benefited greatly from having such a talented and distinctive superstar on their roster, and thanks to the exposure he got from '89 onwards, Muta has even become legendary to Western fans who only watch the man's work in WCW. Would I like to cover more of Muta's career? Absolutely, and my plan is to cover NWO Japan before looking into some of Muta's more important matches in Japan. Really, the story of the Great Muta unfolds far and away from American wrestling, and I'll be doing some homework before putting that particular video together. Hopefully though, I've recommended enough matches for you to check out here today, and if you've never seen Muta in action, I hope this video has given you the urge to check out the man's work in WCW. Again, a big thanks to Dave Knows Wrestling for helping me out with the video introduction, and I'll see you all next time.